First of all, Mr. Corley, thank you, and thank you for highlighting this. I believe you're pretty busy in other countries as well, basically explaining to people what's going on. I want to bring this down sort of for people that have been watching, and I believe there's a lot of people watching this evening. Am I right and correct in saying that the plan is on drained peatlands, that they are going back 70 years from now, and whatever wasn't shored then or drained, whatever we want to call it, they want to restore 20% by 2030, 50% by 2040, and 70% by 2050. Am I correct in my understanding of that?
Yes. Specifically on the target years and percentages, yes, those are all correct. With regard to 70 years, it is specific to certain habitats, as this will, as the year of 70 years is to actually go back to a certain level of habitat condition, to good or favourable condition. It is dependent on the habitat or the species that is established.
Well, we'll
there.
talk about we'll talk about peaty land if we can.
But yes, as with peat itself, it will mean re-wetting to a certain extent, 35% by 2050 and 70% by 2050. So 70%, but even if you read the documents within the annexes, what restoration means is basically re-wetting. They do not actually give examples of other measures other than re-wetting to a certain extent, and it does not mention what level, but re-wetting is the main aim. The Commission have meant no distinction between restoration and re-wetting. So right. The actual target, while it says restoration, is 70% re-wetting by 2050.
In the line of the proposal, now explain this to me. At the moment under the cap, there is different proposals there that's voluntary for farmers around the country. Am I correct in saying, and you might just explain this, that this is a COM that you call it, I don't know, or regulation, whatever you want to call it, or is it like a directive? Is this a legally binding document that Europe is trying to bring forward?
Yes, so a directive is a law that is brought forward, but member states will have the ability and the flexibility to make it accessible to their needs. A regulation is, once it's implemented, this is the law, and it is the law for the entirety of the European Union. And it will be across Europe to this specific, the specificities of this law will be across Europe. So whatever is here, Ireland will face, Romania will face. And with regard to eco schemes, so yes, the eco schemes that you're mentioning there, in conjunction with nature restoration, they are expected that these eco schemes, which are up until 2027, apologies, when the cap ends, the current cap, are to aim for the fulfilment of these targets. However, most of the eco schemes that Ireland and most other countries have put forward are not necessarily based in biodiversity and restoration measures, and as a result, these targets will not be fulfilled under the CAP eco schemes that the EU has given funding for. And so Ireland will basically, unless a lot of things change until 2030, will not achieve the aims and targets here.
Can you explain to me, because I don't understand how the gears in the EU in total work. This is COM 22304 is my understanding. The member states were written to. Are you aware, yes, did Ireland write back to them and give their opinion? From my understanding in documentation I've seen, Sweden have opposed this regulation. Has any other countries opposed it? And what's the process in all of this? Where does, say, the environmental or DG11 is, I think what you call it, come in? Where does the MEPs come in? where does the Council of Ministers come in? Can you give us the sort of the picture or the pathway for where they're going in all of this?
Yeah, happily. So with Ireland, it's going to be under the Committee for Housing, I believe it's called. So it is up to that committee to give a response and an opinion from the Parliament, which is the Dáil and the Seanad together, obviously the Oireachtas, where each member state is asked and written to by the Commission to check whether this overreaches. So it's the principle of subsidiarity to see whether it goes down properly and is not overreaching national laws, and that is proportional, that is not basically overreaching. And so, yes, you're correct. Sweden has written back and said, no, this is overreaching, specifically as the European Union does not have a full competence in forest matters. It has a partial competence. The Commission are going to argue back that this is changed as of not that recent and not that long ago court ruling, which said that it has a competence when it comes to environmental matters. However, this is not necessarily the most reasonable answer, seen as specifically with Sweden, about 30% of all its forestry is under peatland, and more than likely will have to be re-wetted, which is basically its entire economy. It's a huge part of their economy.
Have any other countries objected, Mr. Burley? Have any other countries posed an objection to this regulation?
Finland would be another one. See, this is a law that is specifically targeting, it's restoration of specific areas and habitats, which, in a lot of areas, it's putting up a couple of trees or letting land be rewilded, we'd say. In other countries, specifically northern countries, it's peatlands that are going to be affected. It's forestry areas that are going to be affected, because in a lot of cases, it is just the re-wetting of agricultural and forestry peatlands, and the addition of basically wild forests. In this case, it's going to be Ireland, Finland, Sweden, and the Baltic countries, as well as Germany to a certain extent,
what about
and
Holland?
a little bit of Denmark. So it's the Nordic countries.
Sorry for interrupting you, but what about Holland? I understood that they had a lot of peaty soil. Are they in bother with this?
They are, but also they are completely. Is the way that the Netherlands is actually made up. Of course, there is a lot of peat in the north, and they did a lot of peat extraction, just like we are turf cutting, etc. But a lot of their land is also just basic wetlands, so they are basically going to be in a lot of bother either way because of the nature restoration, because they'll have to. It's in Article 4.2. It's the recreation. So in a lot of cases, they actually have to create nature where it didn't exist in the first place, in order to allow for a proper biodiverse ecosystem in that country. So either way, they're screwed.
Right. I was reading through the document, Article 16, access to justice. Have I read this right, that non-government organisations, some of the environmental people that love writing to Europe and telling them all the stories about Ireland, have a right and will be covered basically financially under I think it's the Irish Convention or something, to object to Johnny Farmer in Galway or Mayo or Roscommon or wherever that didn't re-wet their piece of ground, and they can either take on the state, or if they believe that there's air quality or whatever isn't sufficient. Have I read that right, or am I dreaming?
Yeah, 100%. Any NGO or any organisation which follows the criteria set out in the Aarhus Convention, which is a UN declaration that the EU has signed up to, and so we have to follow. Member states, NGOs will be able to sue their member state governments to bring them to I believe, the European Court of Justice for the non-fulfillment of these targets. So each target, it'll be set for each decade, so 30, 40 and 50. So the first actual analysis or review of these targets and their fulfilment will be happening in only years after it's actually been fully implemented. To the extent that due to the lack of sincere funding, the legal structure here, member states and their farmers owning certain lands, foresters owning lands and not wanting to give them up, there will be a huge backlash against this in general across Europe, and I do foresee, and so does Copa Cogeca and a lot of people over in Brussels here, see that this is going to be a case of member states being sued by NGOs across Europe.
In looking at it, Ireland has a different, what I would call, property right to a lot of European countries. How do you fit this in say, we've the right to private property in our own country? Is it, is that trying to be diminished, or what is going on? Will you tell me?
There's also an EU right to private property that is enshrined in the European Charter of Human Rights. But with regard to this, the issue is that I understand what you're trying to ask here, but the Commission is proposing a law that the member states will have to implement. How they do it is up to them. So if the member states are if the government is breaking your right to private property, then that's their issue. It's not the Commission's issue. So how this is fulfilled is very much up to the member state. And so if this comes down to compulsory purchase orders to buy land, to create a certain amount of national parks, or to force the re-wetting of certain areas, then that is up to the member states to deal with, and to deal with their own legal systems. Because once this is enacted, they have the ability to implement it, because it is enacted into law automatically, and they have a legal obligation to fulfil them. If they don't fulfil it, as I said, they will be sued.
While it's be up to the national state to implement it, the percentages would be prescribed by the Commission, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so as I said, each member state would have something called a national restoration plan. It would look very much like a CAP strategic plan, but it would plan up to 2050. And each tranche will say every decade they would have a specific amount of the measures, the specific funding that they would have to put in place, how far they expect to have achieved by each decade, or whatever specific year that they plan to put in place for that target. But it will be up to the member states. Much, as I say, like a CAP strategic plan, where they create these eco-schemes to fit themselves, but as long as the targets in the mind of the Commission, as long as they're filled, it doesn't matter. These are area-based targets, not result-based, because restoration cannot occur. It could take 20 to 30 to 40 years, even longer in certain areas. So that's why it is the imposition of specific measures over the actual specific area. That's why if you look at the PowerPoint, I don't know if you have it, but on page 11 we'll say Ireland will be coming under the nature restoration target of agro-ecosystems, so the agricultural peatland restoration, and the areas that are currently in bad condition out of the entire area. So the entire area of wetland habitats in Ireland is 70,000 square kilometres. Out of that, while it sounds small, is area in bad condition is 3,500 kilometres, which is 871,000 acres of wetlands that are in bad condition, that are under, it is unclear as of yet to see what level of what the figure is for that to be agricultural peatland to fall under that target. So so Ireland in itself will have to fulfil up to 70% of its peatland to be restored to a certain level.
And
by
it's
that year.
yeah, but I'm trying to get my head around this 70-year thing. Is it that you go back 70 years and look at what you had, or how do you square that circle? And you might just elaborate. We were going on it and we sort of moved away. Does it go in after the right back? And has Ireland written back yet, do you know? After the right back to these people that's looking for the support or otherwise of each member state, does it go into DG11? Where does it go? Can you take me through that trail?
Yeah, so with regards to the 70 years, it is to get it to a certain condition. Some condition, it could be 10 years before, or there mightn't be the necessity to put up such a specific year base. But in certain areas, it is to a specific habitat is to get it to a specific year base, pre-industrial. Because specifically, if we take peatlands and what we've done, we'll take Ireland, of course. What we've done in Ireland is the extraction of peat in an industrial fashion with Bord na Móna. They'll be looking to see to restore that to pre-industrial times, or like obviously there's industrial age, but to before it was industrially damaged in their eyes.
Yeah, but what I'm not over concerned, Bord na Móna are re-wetting some of their ground, but I'm talking about the farm families that would have reclaimed land, be it 10 acres or whatever, 20 acres, to make their farms sustainable. That's the big concern that we have for every farm around this country, because every county is going to be affected by this. It's not just my back door, it's going to be every county. Would you agree with that?
And just before you answer, Mr. Colley, did I see somewhere that only 20% of the land can be Bord na Móna's land? Correct,
that's exactly it. So just to answer your question, Cahir, look, yes, so only 20% can of the target for agricultural peatland can be covered by something other than agricultural area. So that means forestry, or peatland forestry, or peat extraction. So that means only 20% of the target can come from Bord na Móna peat extraction areas. So the target must be filled in Ireland majoritively by agricultural peatland farms. That, as Deputy Fitzmaurice mentioned, it's people who drained their land in the past 50 to 60 years, even more recently, that will be most affected by this.
Good. I want to let others in because I've taken up. First of all, I want to thank you for all the work you've done. But the one thing I'd say is you might give a little message to them out there that, especially crossing the River Shannon, they might get a horrid shock if they think that we're going to re-wet what we're at all our life trying to dry.
Yeah.